We are breathing because every day we need gases so that our cells could do their functions. Remember that animals need oxygen so that cellular respiration will work. Also, we release CO2 as a product of this process. So how would animals exchange gases? This video will then explain how different animals exchange gases, the function of the different parts of these systems, and what would be the effects if these organs are damaged.
Respiration is the process of exchanging gases with the atmosphere. Basically, we exchange gases through the process of diffusion because when we breathe air, oxygen tends to diffuse from its concentration gradient, which is from the lungs to the blood. Also, the pressure of carbon dioxide in the lungs is lower than that of carbon dioxide in the blood. Therefore, diffusing it to the lungs outside of the body. The oxygen-rich blood then proceeds to be pumped to the heart, which will then be distributed through the arteries. The partial pressure of oxygen in the blood is higher than the partial pressure of oxygen in the tissue, diffusing it to the tissues. The opposite goes with the carbon dioxide, making it diffuse to the blood. The oxygen-poor blood then goes back via veins to the heart, which will be pumped back to the lungs, with the blood releasing carbon dioxide and receiving oxygen, and the process repeats. Gas exchange in non-human animals. Gas exchange is the process of taking in oxygen and releasing of carbon dioxide, which is the waste product of cellular respiration. It occurs in animals in a respiratory surface, where the respiratory surface is a living cell, and these living cells should be kept moist. Now, may be through diffusion, through the skin which secretes mucus, through the trachea, the gills, and a respiratory system which includes the lungs and the bronchi. First, simple animals only require simple diffusion for exchange of gases. There are no organs necessary in this process because the membrane is permeable to the gases. An example would be the hydra, an invertebrate with a simple body. Next, phylum Annelida and some amphibians use their skin and secrete mucus to exchange gases in their skin. In insects and arthropods, there's a well-developed respiratory system that consists of tubules that open to the body called trachea. These trachea are then further divided into smaller branches. These smaller branches then directly connect to their cells. This is efficient because of their lacking of a closed respiratory system. Next, fishes and some aquatic animals respire with the help of gills. These gills efficiently get oxygen through the water with the use of a counter-current flow between the blood of the fish and the water, which then releases carbon dioxide. Finally, vertebrates evolved a respiratory system that enables them to breathe through lungs and bronchi. Gas exchange occurs in the small sacs of the lungs called alveoli, where O2 is received by the blood and carbon dioxide is taken out of the body. Unlike land animals, fishes get their oxygen from water that they take in from the bodies of water. Instead of using lungs, they use gills. Most fishes have 4 pairs of gills that are enclosed in a gill chamber found on each side of the head, covered by a gill cover which will help protect these gills. To get oxygen, they gulp water through the mouth and pump it over the gills. It starts When the gill closes and the mouth opens to gulp water, the walls of the mouth move inward and the mouth partially closes and the gill opens. This forces the water of the mouth into the gill chambers. The inside of each gill is composed of filaments. These are closely spaced among the gill arch. Each filament has a tiny extension that are called lamellae. This is where the counter-current flow occurs. Blood flows through the lamellae and takes oxygen from the water that goes opposite the flow of blood. After the blood receives oxygen, the water passes out through the gill openings and the breathing process repeats.
The tracheal system of insects provide direct exchange between air and body cells. In insects such as cockroaches, houseflies, and grasshopper, respiration occurs at the tips of tiny branching pores called spiracles. The tracheal system is a network of tubes that shapes the entire body of the insect. The air enters or leaves the insect through these holes or spiracles. Each cavity is reinforced by chitin, made to insect's tough exoskeleton. Here's a microscopic view of cockroach's spiracle, which is divided into many branches of tubes. Air enters the insect's body through the spiracles into the inside. The larger tubes are called trachea. It is found near the insect's dorsal vessel or the heart. Then, the air passes through the smaller airways called tracheole. It surrounds the insect's organs or tissues. Here, they supply the hindgut or colon. Oxygen for carbon dioxide. The air enters through the spiracles down to the trachea into the tracheoles to supply oxygen through the process of diffusion. Carbon dioxide leaves the cells and moves back to the tracheal system through the spiracles. Constant and alternating contraction and relaxation of insect muscles pumps air like in this praying mantis. Faster contraction and relaxation means faster breathing. These holes or pores we call the spiracle. It is the mediator between the insect's body and the environment. The evolution of lungs facilitated the movement of tetrapods onto land. The adaptation of tetrapods to environment of life is one of the most pivotal milestones in life. Experts have uncovered transitional forms in evolution of tetrapods. These species have sturdy limbs and fins and shoulder girdles to push themselves out of the shallow waters as they gulp in the air. Eventually, limbs develop into better and better forms so that they can move on land better. And lungs became more specialized and they can't breathe in water. Water is only 3% dissolved oxygen compared to air's 21%. Soon, these animals began to move inland where there is no competition, showing little signs that they came from water before. If there are tiny signs, we can still say that we can see these species from the past, from the gills to their body shapes. All of these tetrapod species evolve into mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and birds.
In order to stay alive, the body has to breathe air. We breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. This process is known as respiration. Breathing happens automatically. Every day, the body breathes about 20,000 times. By the time we reach 70 years old, that's about 600 million breaths. All this breathing occurs because of the respiratory system, which includes the nose, throat, voice box,
windpipe, and lungs. At the top of the respiratory system, the nostrils bring air into the nose, where it's filtered, warmed, and moistened as it flows in the nasal cavity. Tiny hairs called cilia protect the nasal passageways and other parts of the respiratory tract and filter out dust and other particles that enter the nose through the breathed air. Air can also be breathed in through the mouth but does not process it in the nasal cavity. The two airways of the nose and mouth meet up at the pharynx, which is located at the back of the throat. The pharynx carries both food and air and is used for digestion and respiration. One path is for food. This is called the esophagus, which leads onto the stomach. The other side is for air. It's called the trachea. A small flap of tissue called the epiglottis covers the air-only passage when we swallow. This stops food and liquid from going into the lungs. The larynx or voice box is located at the top of the trachea, the air-only pipe. This is where our vocal cords are. The trachea or windpipe, which is a 2 to 3 cm tube, then extends downwards from the bottom of the larynx for about 12 centimeters. The walls of the windpipe are made strong by stiff rings of cartilage that keep it open. The trachea is also lined with tiny hairs. They sweep foreign particles and fluids out of the airway, keeping them from entering the lungs. The windpipe divides into two branches called bronchi, and each one of these enters one of the two lungs of the body. Each branch resembles the limbs of a tree dividing into smaller, finer branches called bronchioles. The bronchioles end in tiny air sacs called alveoli, which look a bit like grapes. These structures enable fresh air to get to the air sacs, which are surrounded by tiny blood vessels or capillaries. The oxygen passes through these air sacs by dissolving in a film of moisture on the epithelial cells and travels through the capillary walls into the bloodstream. At the same time, carbon dioxide transfers from the bloodstream capillaries then into the air sacs where it gets breathed out of the body. The major branches of our respiratory system are lined by a moist epithelium covered by cilia and a thin film of mucus. These are the respiratory system's cleaning system. The cilia move mucus with trapped dust, pollen, and contaminants upward to the pharynx where it is usually swallowed. A supportive organism has been placed inside each and every one of the millions of alveoli to serve the human body. These are known as type 2 cells. Type 2 cells produce a very special substance called surfactant and spread this over the internal surfaces in the alveoli. Surfactant is a molecule specially designed to reduce the surface tension of water. Thanks to this molecule, the alveoli are prevented from collapsing inwards. In a surfactant dysfunction, protein C in a central component in lung lubricant surfactant is produced abnormally. As a result, the surfactant gums up the air sacs in the lungs and interferes with the oxygenation of blood. Surfactant helps maintain the elasticity of the pulmonary muscles. Without the vital lubricant, the lungs are like an engine without oil, incapable of running smoothly. When you inhale smoke, it travels down to main parts of your lungs, your airways, the bronchial tubes, and small air sacs, the alveoli. With each breath, air travels down your windpipe called the trachea and enters your lung through the bronchial tubes. Air then moves into thousands of tiny alveoli, where oxygen from the air moves into your bloodstream and the waste product carbon dioxide moves out of your bloodstream. Tiny hair-like projections called cilia line your bronchial tubes and sweep harmful substances out of your lungs. Cigarette smoke irritates the lining of your bronchial tubes, causing them to swell and make mucus. Cigarette smoke also slows the movement of your cilia, causing some of the smoke and mucus stay in your lungs. While you are sleeping, Some of the cilia recover and start pushing more pollutants and mucus out of your lungs. When you wake up, your body attempts to expel this material by coughing repeatedly, a condition known as smoker's cough. Over time, chronic bronchitis develops as your cilia stop working. Your airways become clogged with scars and mucus, and breathing becomes difficult. Your lungs are now more vulnerable to further disease. Cigarette smoke also damages your alveoli, making it harder for oxygen and carbon dioxide to exchange with your blood. Over time, the delicate walls of alveoli become permanently damaged, and the lungs lose the elasticity that helps expel air during exhalation, which causes breathlessness and constant fatigue. Chronic bronchitis and emphysema are collectively called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, in short, COPD. COPD is a gradual loss of the ability to breathe for which there is no cure. With COPD, both lung ventilation and gas exchange are severely impaired.
Breathing is the alternate inhalation and exhalation of air. This ventilation of your lungs maintains high oxygen and low carbon dioxide concentrations at the respiratory surface. There are two types of breathing: positive pressure breathing, used mostly by amphibians, and negative pressure breathing, used by mammals. As mammals, humans use the negative pressure breathing for ventilation. When we inhale, our diaphragm contracts and moves downward. It expands our chest cavity and increases the volume of our lungs. This lowers the air pressure in the alveoli to less than the atmospheric pressure. Flowing from a region of higher pressure to one which is lower, air is pulled through the nostrils and down the tubes to the alveoli. When we exhale, our diaphragm relaxes and moves upward. It decreases the volume of the rib cage and chest cavity and increases air pressure in the lungs, forcing air out. There is what we call the tidal volume, or the volume of air we inhale and exhale in every breath we take, while the vital capacity refers to the volume of air breathed during maximal inhalation or exhalation. But when we exhale, we do not exhale all the air that we've inhaled, and that is what we call the residual volume or the dead air. Even though we can try to hold our breath voluntarily, most of the time, our breathing is under involuntary control. The reason behind this is because of our breathing control center. Our breathing control center, represented here as green, is in a part of our brain called medulla oblongata, which ensures that our breathing rate is coordinated with our body's need for oxygen. Nerves from this center signal the diaphragm and rib muscles to contract, causing one to inhale. The center regulates breathing rate in response to changes in the carbon dioxide level of the blood. The more carbon dioxide in our body, the more we produce carbonic acid. And this acid slightly lowers the pH of the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. When the central chemoreceptors, which monitors carbon dioxide and pH levels, senses this pH drop, its control center increases both the rate and depth of breathing. Thus, carbon dioxide is eliminated and pH level is normalized. A secondary control over breathing is exerted by the peripheral chemoreceptors, with aorta and carotid arteries as key groups. These peripheral chemoreceptors senses levels of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH. When oxygen level in the blood is severely depressed, these sensors signal the control center via nerves to increase the rate of breathing. The breathing control center responds to a variety of nervous and chemical signals that serve to keep the rate and depth of one's breathing in tune with the metabolic needs of the body. Each gas has what we call a partial pressure, the pressure that accounts for a portion of the total pressure of the mixture. Molecules of each kinds of gas will diffuse down a gradient of their own partial pressure independently of the other gases. During the transport of respiratory gases, the circulatory system also plays a part. But let's start from the lungs. Here, the partial pressure of oxygen, PO2, in the air inside the alveoli is greater than the PO2 in the blood. Oxygen diffuses to red blood cells from the air. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide, PCO2, in the lungs is lesser than the PCO2 in the blood. That is why carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood to the alveoli. Oxygenated blood is carried through the pulmonary veins into the heart, and the heart pumps the blood into the systematic arteries to the body. Partial pressure of oxygen, PO2, in the blood is greater than the PO2 in the body tissues. Oxygen diffuses from red blood cells to tissues through the interstitial fluid. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide, PCO2, in the blood is lesser than the PCO2 in the tissues. That's why carbon dioxide diffuses from tissues to the blood through the interstitial fluid. The oxygenated blood is then carried through the systematic arteries into the heart, and the heart through the pulmonary veins to the lungs. The physical process underlying this gas exchange is diffusion of each gas down its partial pressure gradient.
All cells require oxygen. Oxygen is the essential fuel for cells to stay alive and functions in its own activities. Bringing of oxygen to the cells requires uptake of oxygen coming from the lungs, its transportation in the blood, and its delivery to cells all over the body. The first step is the taking up of oxygen by blood flowing through fine capillaries in the walls of the lungs, air sacs, also called as alveoli. The oxygen molecules change from their state as a gas, freely circulating in the air, dissolving into solution in the plasma within the capillaries of the alveoli. Once in the solutions of the blood, 98% of this dissolved oxygen is taken up by passing through red cells, leaving just 2% in the remaining physical solution unattached. Red cells are well suited for transporting oxygen because they contain hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is an iron-containing pigment that turns red when it binds to oxygen. It consists of 4 polypeptide chains. Each polypeptide chain is attached to a chemical group called heme. Hemoglobin that is fully saturated by oxygen and turns to bright red is called oxyhemoglobin. On the other hand, hemoglobin that is not saturated with oxygen and is purplish blue in color is called deoxyhemoglobin. Heme makes it possible for the red cells to pick up oxygen dissolved from the blood. Hemoglobin is a multipurpose molecule. It also helps transport carbon dioxide and assists in the buffering of the blood.
Most of the carbon dioxide that diffuses from tissue cells into a capillary enters red blood cells where some of it combines with hemoglobin. The partial pressure of oxygen represents the level of dissolved oxygen in the plasma. As oxygen is released and is carried in solution, the partial pressure oxygen in the capillaries becomes greater than the partial pressure oxygen in the surrounding tissues. This causes the oxygen to move out of the capillaries into the tissues and finally reach the cells. This graph shows why hemoglobin is particularly suited for its role in transporting oxygen. This oxygen dissociation curve demonstrates the relationship between the oxygen carrying in combination with hemoglobin. The oxygen percent saturation and the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood. The sharp upstroke and the flat plateau illustrates how oxygen is released into the tissues over a wide range of conditions. The maternal fetal circulation. The fetus literally swims in a protective watery bath called the amniotic fluid. Its non-functional lungs are full of fluid. The uterine artery from the mother supplies the blood to the fetus. The human fetus exchanges gases with the mother's blood by the way of the placenta. A large network of capillaries fan out into the placenta from blood vessels in the umbilical cord of the fetus. Blood from the mother transfers oxygen and nutrients to the placenta. The fetus gets its oxygen and nutrients and returns waste and carbon dioxide via the placenta. These capillaries exchange gases with the maternal blood that circulates in the placenta, and the mother's circulatory system transports the gases to and from her lungs. Oxygen is transferred from the uterus to the placenta, and from the placenta to the fetus. Then, carbon dioxide is transferred from the placenta to the uterus. Aiding oxygen uptake by the fetus is fetal hemoglobin, which attracts oxygen more strongly than does adult hemoglobin. The umbilical cord delivers nutrient-rich blood to the baby and also serves as the exit for waste that the baby produces while in the womb. Without this cord, the baby could not survive. At birth, the uterus contracts to push the baby out. This is how the baby contracts while in the mother's womb. With each contraction, blood flow to the fetus is reduced, reducing oxygen transfer to the fetus. When the uterus relaxes, oxygen transfer resumes.
When we breathe under normal conditions, air travels through our nose, down our trachea, divided to smaller and smaller airways called bronchi. The bronchi is then divided into smaller pathways called bronchioles, and finally into the great clusters of thin, fragile sacs called alveoli. The alveoli is located wherein oxygen is exchanged for carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. Inhaled toxic vapors such as those found in cigarette smoke can lead to emphysema, an irreversible disease that jeopardizes our lungs' ability to function. At first, the alveoli were destroyed. This results in the formation of holes. Those holes lead into the collapse of bronchioles and blocks or conceals airflow out of the alveoli. The exchange of oxygen is reduced, thus a lung of a person with emphysema breathes more rapidly than a normal lung person. It causes shortness of breath that result into damage in lungs and heart, or worse, death.
How can one prevent disease of the respiratory system? First, quit smoking and avoid secondhand smoking. Second, get enough sleep. Next, eat a well-balanced diet. Avoid stress. Maintain proper hygiene. Get regular exercise. Drink enough water. However, if you get sick and detect some symptoms, you should go consult your doctor to take steps on what you will do.
Ventilation, that is right. Diaphragm flattens, it rises for life. The respiratory system, the respiratory system. Let's go. Respiratory system is made of your lungs and passages that lead them oxygen to blood. It travels round your body organs, everyone. Breathe out gas, carbon, and these are the lungs. Respiratory system is made of your lungs and passages that lead them oxygen to blood. It travels round your body organs, everyone. Breathe out gas, carbon, and these are the lungs. Respiratory, respiratory system. Respiratory, respiratory, respiratory system. Respiratory, respiratory, respiratory system. That's right, it's the lungs. Respiratory system.